of birth, gender, and inheritance is questioned or overturned. The book of Numbers describes a dilemma Moses faced regarding distribution of shares in the coming conquest of the land. Only adult males were to be counted. At this, the 5 daughters of Tzlachchad, a man of the tribe of Manasseh, approached Moses to complain. "Our father died in the wilderness, and he had no sons. Why should the name of our father be done away from among his family because he had no son? Give us a possession among the brethren of our father." Moses consults with God, who replies, "The daughters of Tzlachchad are right." And this occasions the statement of a general inheritance rule. If a man die and have no son, then you shall cause his inheritance to pass unto his daughter. But this solution doesn't end the matter, as Moses learns when the daughters' cousins, men of the tribe of Manasseh, come to complain that if the daughters of Tzlachchad marry men of other tribes, then their lands will become part of the legacy of those other tribes, in violation of the permanent assignment to each tribe of specific territories. And here we have, I think, some echoes with the local non-Jewish history. Again, Moses passes on the divine word. The tribesmen have a point. So let the daughters be married to whom they think best, only into the family of the tribe of their father shall they be married. So this rule requires women to marry only men of their father's tribe, but it applies only to women who have inherited land. We went from the Maghreb back to the Bible, and now we leap forward again, not so many centuries, to the rabbis of the Talmud in the first centuries of the Common Era. What we read on the subject of family life in rabbinic texts is rich and suggestive, but we have to be extremely cautious about taking it as evidence for facts on the ground. People in the times of the rabbis differed from us in ways we can sometimes only imagine. Yet some of the best ways to read those texts draw on what we know about personal and social relations in our own times. Israeli scholar Isaiah Gaffney, for example, pertinently cites a rabbinic tale about a Roman matron who attempts to usurp the divine task of matchmaking. I have to step aside from my text for a second and quote the bit in the Talmud that says, well, since God created the world in 6 days, what has he been doing ever since then? And the answer is, he's arranging matches. So there's this other story about a Roman matron who attempts to usurp the divine task of matchmaking, only to be encountered the next day with a horde of mutually bruised and battered couples. The story reflects the rabbi's knowledge that the creation of new family ties is always a risky affair. On a rather different question, whether or not polygamy was really practiced by Jews in rabbinic times, Gaffney notes evidence from ancient gravestones which never referred to such multiple marriages. But he properly reminds us that not too much can be read into the absence of names of multiple wives. As he writes, "Here, one wonders what we might hope to find. Would the bereaved husband inscribed, 'You were my favorite,' and then go home to the others? Might a band of recent widows who probably never got along too well bid their husband goodbye with, 'We all loved you'?" In his study of Jewish marriage in antiquity, Professor Michael Satlow notes a problem for historians which we might call the prescription gap. Or as Satlow puts it, many texts say what ought to be done, but the prescriptions are not necessarily descriptive, that is, of what actually happened. A piquant example and certainly one that resonates with questions about normative and actual marriage patterns today, concerns the age at which a male is to marry. As Satlow documents, the Babylonian rabbis generally seem to have proposed a slightly earlier ideal marriage age for males, that is close to purity, forget about purity, close to puberty, so that desire can find its proper outlet, earlier than the Palestinian rabbis did. They suggested around 18 or 20. The sources agree that females should marry even younger. However, when Satlow turns to the realities of marriage age, he suggests that in Palestine and the Western diaspora, Jewish elite men, at least, might have typically married around 30 to women who were in their mid to late teens. Okay, why this difference in marriage ages between Babylonia and Palestine? Satlow suggests that the Palestinians generally accepted the Hellenic value of oikos, that is, the importance of creating a household as an aspect of full adulthood, which, as we know, does not come with puberty. The Babylonian rabbis were more ambivalent, tending to stress the tension between obligations to wife and family versus the need to have one's time and mind, one being normatively male here, free to concentrate on study of the Torah. Other research on aspects of Jewish family life in antiquity likewise suggests that patterns familiar to us may not be as novel as we suppose. Dvorah Weisberg, in a close study of the career of a particular biblical provision regarding marriage, argues for the primary importance in the rabbinic view of the nuclear family. This is striking because even those of us who've spent some time reflecting on such topics still commonly assume that one of the key aspects of modernization for Jews, as for others, is the breakdown of strong extended family ties and a tendency toward more limited notions of family. If Weisberg is correct, then perhaps over the many centuries of Israelite and Jewish life, we should expect any number of swings from more nuclear to more extended family ties and back again. Summarizing the state of research on the Jewish family in antiquity, Harvard professor Shia Cohen confirms that just as there has never been one monolithic Judaism, but at least we can say is a variety of Judaisms, it would be more appropriate to refer to varieties of Jewish families. More unexpectedly, he points out the striking conclusion that the Jewish family in antiquity seems not to have been distinctive by the power of its Jewishness. Rather, its structures, ideals, and dynamics seem to have been virtually identical with those of its ambient cultures. In that case, what, if anything, makes studying the Jewish family special? There are a couple of good answers to this question. First, Jews and the record they have left constitute not only a part of the worlds they lived in, but very often a privileged window on those larger worlds. Even if those records end up, in many respects, showing us people typical of their time and place, our chance to see that picture at all often depends on texts in Jewish languages, written down for the purpose of maintaining Jewish identity and community, and transmitted because of a distinctive Jewish emphasis on study and on written transmission. Second, what is fascinating and rich in the study of Jews is not only how they differ from others, but how they have, in so many different worlds, managed to be at once like Jews in other times and places, and like the non-Jews of their own times and places. The sometimes rare respects in which Jewish patterns did differ from those of their non-Jewish neighbors are just the sort of thing to whet our imagination about how it felt to be Jewish in those different cultural worlds. Roman law, speculates Shia Cohen, may have had something to do with another distinctive feature of Jewish family patterns: the determination of Jewishness through the through the mother rather than through the father. On the one hand, this rule seems axiomatic in Judaism. On the other hand, as Cohen makes clear, it has not always been a feature of Jewish society. It is not found in the Bible, where there are several examples of Israelite men marrying foreign women without having their children excluded from the Israelite kin group. Cohen carefully argues that the rule of maternal determination of Jewishness derives from the generations of rabbis whose works are recorded in the foundational 2nd century text known as the Mishnah. But how? Cohen reviews 7 possible reasons, rejects 5 as at best unlikely and at worst flatly wrong, yet finds compelling evidence for influence from comparable Roman law and also a possible extension of biblical rules forbidding the mixture of different natural kinds of animals and plants. Still, he asks, why did the rabbis break with previous biblical and later practice? And he confesses, I do not know. And he is not a particularly modest scholar. Cohen grants, of course, the enormous significance of this matrilineal principle in subsequent Jewish law and life, but suggests that at its origin, it may have had more to do with the rabbis' intellectual exercises in modes of classification than with any pressing social needs of their time and place. To be sure, no one should imagine the rabbis as pure intellects, divorced from social pressures. In a book called The Culture of the Babylonian Talmud, Jeffrey Rubenstein of New York University sketches out key aspects of the values, tensions, pressures, and hierarchies that shaped the world of those now anonymous scholars in whose days the final text of the Talmud was redacted. In his chapter, Lineage and Rabbinic Leadership, he stresses the remarkably tight connection between authority in matters of Torah and exalted, especially priestly, descent. Rubenstein suggests that this high concern for good lineage as a qualification for scholarly leadership had much to do with the diasporic situation of Babylonian Jewry. He writes, from its inception, the Babylonian Jewish community seems to have zealously guarded its pedigrees as a necessary strategy to prevent assimilation within the larger society. Apparently, that is, marrying Jewish wasn't enough in this social world. It was important to arrange marriages with the right families as well. Yet Rubenstein also suggests that this heightened concern for lineage reflected as well the value placed on noble blood in Persian, that is, non-Jewish surrounding culture. These two claims, first, that Jewish concerns for good genealogy reflected anxiety about keeping the Jewish community separate, and second, that it reflected the values of the surrounding non-Jewish world, may seem logically to be mutually exclusive, but in the real world, emphasizing both of them seems entirely plausible to me. Something like the tension expressed in the Talmud between the genealogical merit of one's ancestry and the individual merit of one's Torah scholarship is reflected in the complex notion of yichus, or connection, that helped drive social distinction and marriage prospects among the Jews of early modern Eastern Europe. Its fundamental meaning of this term yichus is family background, that is, the prestige that accrues to any individual by dint of his or her ancestry on both sides. But the concept also relates to the individual's own merits and demerits, since yichus could be diminished by a failure of scholarship or character, but could also be acquired through one's own success in learning or in business. Money helped too, whether inherited or earned. Yichus notwithstanding, both in 19th century Eastern Europe and in the Orthodox world today, an introduction stressing one's lineage might nevertheless provoke the response that a person's individual qualities are more important than who his or her ancestors were. Where were the women in these centuries of Jewish families? Numerous sources, including Jewish ones, have been summoned from the archives in recent decades to help demonstrate their lively presence. One of the most popular sources for understanding the character of early modern European Jewish life has long been the memoirs of Glickel of Hameln. Glickel lived in northern Germany in the latter half of the 17th century. Her account contains lively narratives about her combined business and family concerns. Though she expresses profound Jewish piety and literacy, she's also very much a northern European woman of her time. It is not clear to what extent her mix of commercial and domestic roles represents a specifically Jewish family pattern, rather than reflecting the mores of the merchant classes of her time and place. Glickel bore numerous children, not all of whom survived. She began writing her memoirs in sorrow after the death of her beloved husband and proceeded to maintain the family's long-distance trading business, anxious to avoid failing and becoming dependent on her children. As she asserts at the beginning of her narrative addressed to them, "We should, I say, put ourselves to great pains for our children, for on this the world is built. Yet we must understand that if children did as much for their parents, the children would quickly tire of it." Glickel is not especially sentimental about her children, nor does she see them as the ultimate purpose of her life. On the contrary, in her widowhood, she reports seriously contemplating the age-old dream of pious Jews to return to Zion. But